We live in a noisy world. It's never been easier to express your thoughts, opinions, or even what you ate for breakfast. The problem is billions of other people are doing the same thing. So how do you stand out among all the noise and the chatter? Well, that's what my guest and I talk about in today's episode.
Welcome to the World Changer Show with Matt McWilliams. I'm your host, Mark Severkrop, a world changer just like you and Matt. On each show, we're going to bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unleash the world changer inside of you and live with passion, lead with purpose, and leave a legacy. Thanks for joining us today. Now let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the World Changer Show. You are listening to episode 91. And as always, you can find the links for everything talked about today, including the unedited video cast of the interview, on the show notes page at mattmcwilliams.com/091. But Matt, before we get into the interview, I want to let the people know that if, as they're listening to the interview, if they hear something that they really like, what we want you to do is get out your smartphone and text authentic to 33444, and that will enter you to win a free copy of the book that Matt and our guests talk about today. You ready to get started, Matt?
Yeah, so that's authentic at 33444.
33444. Yes.
Enter to win one of those myself there. That's super easy. I'm loving this new text thing, and I know we've heard some good things about that. So
we have, yeah.
I love it. It's not like this technology didn't exist 7 minutes ago, right. But it's new for us and we're loving it.
That's right. All right. So today's guest is the founder of Accidental Creative, a company that helps creative people and teams generate brilliant ideas. He regularly speaks and consults with companies about how to develop practices and systems that lead to everyday brilliance. He's the author of 3 books, The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, and his brand new book, Louder Than Words, Harnessing the Power of Your Authentic Voice. His books have been translated into more than a dozen languages, and he speaks internationally on creativity, productivity, leadership, and passion for work. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy this interview with Todd Henry.
All right. Well, welcome to the show, Todd.
Thanks, Matt. It's great to be here.
Well, today we're going to talk about this really cool book here, Louder Than Words, which I am loving. It's called, the subtitle is Harness the Power of Your Authentic Voice. And I think that's something that is super important for people to find their authentic voice, especially in what I would call, this may be like a buzzword today, but an inauthentic world. Right. So I guess it's a great place to start. I mean, it's a natural starting place here is, what the heck is authentic voice? What does authentic voice, that term, mean to you?
Yeah, so your voice is the way that your work speaks. It's the way that it speaks for you, right? And so your work tells tales. It speaks about you. It speaks about your values. It speaks about what you care about, what you deem worthy of your time, your energy, your attention. And while your work speaks about you, I think the question many of us never wrestle with is, does my work really speak for me? Does it really represent me well? And when you look at somebody's body of work, if they are saying one thing, you can pretty quickly pick up on the fact that what they really mean is something else. It's pretty easy to see through the facade if they're not coming from a place of authenticity. And so really, when I talk about an authentic voice, what I mean is grounding your work in something that really matters to you, that's substantive, understanding what you stand for, understanding what impact you want to have in the world, and then founding your work upon that instead of, like a lot of people do, fabricating some kind of external shell that's going to look really good, really shiny to everyone else, but ultimately it's going to fall flat. I believe your body of work will fall flat. It'll be hollow if people don't see that you're invested, that you really have skin in the game.
Yeah. So I guess the next starting point, I guess, would be, so how do we find that voice? Like, where do we start with actually discovering what our authentic voice is?
Yeah, so I would say, well, first of all, I don't think it's a a lot of people talk about finding your voice. They say, how do I find my voice? And I think that can be dangerous terminology, because I think that that implies that it's a process of going out into the backyard, digging up, and you find some little treasure chest full of gold and aha, I found my voice, right? And it's a once and done kind of thing. And I think instead, if you look at the lives of contributors, people who have built substantive bodies of work over a long period of time, what you'll find is that their voices developed in layers over the course of time. They discovered who they are by excavating, learning, redirecting, applying their knowledge. And then over time, that success kind of built up. It was layered, that's how I believe, as I look at the broad array of work out there in the marketplace, that's how the best bodies of work are built over the course of time. And so I preferred in the book, I tried to really squash out any find your voice language and instead tried to refer to it as developing your voice. And I believe there are three parts of that, three kind of core elements of what I would term resonant voices that really resonate in the marketplace. The first one is identity. Now, when we talk about voice or talking about an authentic voice, this is kind of where we camp out, right? We talk about, know who you are and just put it out there to the world and understand your identity, and that's your voice. I believe that's only one small part of voice, but it's an important part, which is essentially about who are you? What do you stand for? What do you care about? Can people see that in your work? Is what you care about infused in your day-to-day activity? When people look at your work, that's one part of voice, I believe. One of three. The second part is vision. I think we also have to answer the question, where am I going? And you have to shape your work according to the impact you want your work to have in the world, because your voice isn't just what you say, it's how you're heard by others. It's how you're received by other people, right? So you have to work on shaping that vision so that it meets your intended audience with empathy, and so that you're able to lead them to a place that you want to go. Because I don't know about you, for me, I want my work to have impact. I mean, I don't want to just create work for myself and sit around looking at my work, right? I want it to have impact.
Awesome my work is,
right? So, and so, I want that work to have impact, which means I have to understand my intended audience, and I have to communicate in a way that's going to connect with them, that's going to resonate with them. And so vision is kind of a core second part of it. The third part is mastery. So I can have a grounded sense of self, a sense of identity. I can have a sense of vision and be shaping my work so that it connects with my audience. But if I'm not a master of my domain, if I haven't mastered a set of skills like empathy, like timing, like the basic fundamental building blocks of my platform, I'm not going to be credible. Nobody's going to listen to me because I don't have a sense of mastery. And so that's kind of the third element of voice. So identity, vision, mastery, we can break those down into their constituent parts like I do in Louder Than Words, and you can kind of look at each element of those constituent parts and work on them individually. But I believe that as I looked at resonant bodies of work, people who have been productive over a long period of time, are really deeply connected with their audience, they had elements of all three of these in place, and they all kind of work together as what I called the voice engine in the book, because they kind of drive the most compelling and resonant voices.
Yeah. So you reminded me of something that we'll talk about in a second, but I think maybe the next question is, you talk about this isn't something you just go out and dig up in the backyard. So it's not something you found. And I set you up for that because it was totally a trick question, because I knew the answer already. Because I have read enough of the book to know that.
Right.
But I mean, do you think that maybe like most people really do know kind of their voice, and maybe they're just afraid to admit it? I mean, is it like I'll tell my story after you answer that question, but I'm kind of curious if that's something you think it's like, yeah, I really do know my voice. It's just that I don't want that to be my voice, or I'm afraid to admit that because it's unpopular or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think there's an element of, we don't want to go looking. We don't want to go exploring and excavating because we're afraid of what we'll find. Not just because we're afraid we won't like what we find, but because the moment you have an idea, the moment you have an insight, or you discover something, or you have an intuition, it immediately creates accountability to act on that. Right. So the moment that you have some kind of insight about yourself or some kind of idea about where you could go, it introduces a kind of tension, right? Between, am I going to stay still, or am I going to move? Am I going to go toward that thing? And I think most of us just prefer comfort. Frankly, most of us we would prefer to stay squarely in the place where we don't have to deal with that. And so I do think there's a certain amount of that people prefer comfort over action, but that's not how the world has changed. That's not how bodies of work are built, at least not bodies of work that you can be proud of, right? They're built as you do the uncomfortable thing that is also the right thing.
So where I was going with that, one of the visions I had in my head was, so back up and kind of tell a little bit of a story here. So I discovered you sitting in LaGuardia Airport, maybe 18 months ago, I think, give or take. And I looked up Jeff Goins in iTunes.
Yeah.
And I've been kind of following. This is really before I got to know Jeff at all. But I was kind of on this Jeff Goins kick, and I was like, oh, he did an interview with this guy I've never heard of. I'll listen to this Accidental Creative podcast. So, by the way, if anyway, go check out the Accidental Creative podcast. It's awesome. And so I listened to your interview sitting there in the LaGuardia Airport, and it's like the cutout every 30 seconds because Boingo Wi-Fi kept going down. Yeah. And so I'd get like a 30-second clip. You guys were like, that was really good. And then I'd wait like another 30 seconds for the next 30 seconds. It was awesome. But anyway, Jeff and I had a conversation for his book, The Art of Work. Mm-hmm. And he interviewed me in it's chapter 5, the best chapter, of course, in the whole book. But no, I say that to say that he interviewed me. When I reached out to him, he was like, has anybody found their calling? And I reached out to him. I'm like, hey, Jeff, my life is awesome. And I make more money than I've ever made in my life. And I've built this business. And just look at me. I'm amazing. Right. I don't know for the life of me why he actually agreed to talk to me with that story that I led with. But this is actually shortly after I started listening to your podcast. And we talked through my story. And the funny thing was, as I'm telling my story, I'm going, like, there's this tape playing in my mind going, this story that you're telling to the world is not your story.
Wow.
The story you're telling Jeff is your story. And sure enough, he emailed me. I will never forget what he said. He wrote this, 7-page, if you print it out, email. And he said, you came to me and talked about how great your life was, but as we talked through your life, it was failure after failure, and now you're where you're supposed to be because of those. That's your story. If it were me, I would share that story. Just one dude's opinion is how he ended it. Do what you want with it. And like you said, that accountability that we got to act on that. And I went, okay, I have one of two choices. I can continue to tell this fake story.
Right.
That makes me feel good. Or I can write a blog post about how Jeff Goins told me my real story and see how it resonates. And people went, yeah, we like that better. We like the story when you say, hey, here's how I screwed something up, and here's what I learned from it, and here's what you can do with that information.
Right.
As opposed to, here's how great my life is and how you should copy everything that I do. Like, that's no fun.
Right.
So I want to tell that story because it's so true about it's scary. And what do we do with that information? So, okay. So we find our voice. Find in air quotation marks, which is basically Jeff Goins tells us what our real voice is. Right. What do we do with that next? Like, how do we get that voice kind of out there in the world? Like, one of the things you talk about, like, what is voice? It's expression and then medium or platform. We'll skip that first. We kind of touched on that first step, but how do we get the platform, so to speak, out there in the world?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of conversations about platform, right? And I would say that the platform starts to become apparent, I think, once you really drill down on your message. I think once you understand who you are, you understand who you're trying to reach, who your intended audience is, what they care about, frankly, and some of their interests and their concerns, some of the things that keep them awake at night. I mean, once you really understand that, which is also, by the way, a part of how you need to craft your message, then I think that it starts to become apparent the best way to reach those people. In the book, I share the story of Epiphio Studios, which is a brilliant creative house, actually based here in Cincinnati, where I'm based. I talked to Jeremy Pryor from Epiphio about how they think about their audience or how they think about their work, and he said, "Listen, we always like to our philosophy is we make the audience the hero." The audience is the hero for everything we do, not the people creating the video, not the product, the audience is the hero. And so we make the audience at the center of everything. If we can create an epiphany for the audience, everything will change for them. And then, we're going to be successful at connecting with them because we've changed them. They can never go back to the way they were. And he told me, what we want to do is think about, what do we care about? So what message do we have to give out there? What does the audience care about? So what are they concerned about at the end of the day? What are the problems they're trying to solve? And then the third element, which is something that we often don't consider, Matt, but I think is also very important, is what are some themes, some ideas, some other cultural narratives that are out there right now that already have momentum? And how can we look at not just what I care about, not just what the audience cares about, because those are the two concentric circles we tend to look at and say, okay, how do I build a platform in the middle of that? But look at the third circle, which is what are some themes that are already out there that have momentum? And then let's build a platform right in the middle of that. Why? Because at the intersection of that, there's already momentum, right? There's momentum for you. There's momentum for your intended audience, but there's also momentum culturally. So you don't have to work quite as hard to get your message out there if you're building it at the intersection of where everything is already happening. The problem is a lot of people think, oh, well, this is what I care about. This is my authentic self. And then they go off in a corner somewhere and they're screaming at everybody saying, come over here, come over here. And nobody's listening to them. It's far better if you go over where people already are and you say, hey, take a step with me. Okay, take another step with me. Hey, take another step with me. And then you get them over here, right? You lead them where you want them to go. Leadership is about being in the midst of people and influencing them to follow you where you want them to go. Not controlling them, that's very different, but influencing them to go with you one step at a time to where you want them to go, which is, I believe, that's the most authentic, genuine, and effective way to build a body of work and to impact the world, rather than what most people think is, I'm going to do my thing, and if you're on board, that's great. If you're not, then I don't want you anyway, right? I think that's a very short-sighted way to think about impact.
Well, there's a couple things I got out of that, Todd. I mean, one is the audience is the hero, and I can only see the last couple of words of it, but on my whiteboard is a note that I was in one of, I don't know if you know Ray Edwards, but I was in one of his team meetings. It's probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we're working on a project together, and Ray said, just a reminder, guys, the reader is the hero, and I went, huh. You know, that's it's the same theme, you know, reader, listener, whatever, attendee, you name it. They're the hero. That's right. Unless you make them the hero and show them how to live heroically, you're always going to be very myopic. You know, it's always going to be like centered on me, and I'm not the hero. I'm not the hero of this show. You, Todd, are one of the heroes. More importantly, everyone listening is the hero. And and that's the first thing. And the second thing is, you talked about this. You know, I hear the term authentic voice, and so immediately I'm going to tell you where my mind went. You know, I looked at the cover of the book. Actually, I looked at it on Amazon. I went, authentic voice. Okay, that means unique, revolutionary, possibly out there. And what you're saying now as a clarification is, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be over in left field, like you said, screaming. You join the conversation, to quote, I think Dan Kennedy says, you join the conversation that's already taking place in people's heads. Right. And that doesn't mean be inauthentic or disingenuous and that you need to write a blog about celebrity gossip because that's what's popular. Right. But
it's not trend chasing.
Yeah. If the world doesn't care about it, basically, it's going to be hard for you to get any traction is kind of what I took out of that. Yeah.
And that doesn't, by the way, mean that you have to communicate the way the world is communicating about it, right? It just means you have to be aware of the kinds of themes, the kinds of trends, the kinds of things that are already happening culturally, so that you can introduce your work in a context that people will understand. You know, context matters. And often people dismiss really good work simply because they don't have a container for it. They don't have a context for it. And so they'll experience something and they'll make a mental note of it and they'll put it on a shelf somewhere and they'll never come back to it because there's no context for it. So that's why it's important. People say, well, what you're saying is be inauthentic. You're telling me to chase trends. You're telling me to throw work out there that you think is going to match something that's going on in culture. No, I'm not saying ignore yourself. That's why there are 3 elements of this, right? What you care about, what they care about, and ideas. What you care about is just as important. And so you should never cross a line in your work that violates some kind of personal ethic or something that you care about. If you have to compromise yourself in order to do that, it's not your authentic voice. In the same way, if you have to trash your audience or what they care about, it's not your authentic voice, right? So all of these 3 things have to work together, and identity, vision, mastery have to work together in order for it to be your authentic voice. And I think we think it's just either or. It has to be one thing or another. Either I'm fabricating a shell and I'm pitching myself, or it's authenticity and it's, oh, come all ye, and I hope you like me. If you don't, you don't. It's too bad. And I think that there's a middle path that we can walk. But listen, that's a path of maturity. It's a difficult path. It's not an easy path. There's not a 1, 2, 3 step solution for it. It is a difficult path of maturity that takes years to develop, but it is a far more substantive path in the end.
No, I love that. I mean, I think that you start where people are and then you take them on a journey.
Right.
And I think, speaking of Jeff Goins, those of you who don't know Jeff, check him out at goinswriter.com. As he says, it's Goins, it's like groins without the R. But goinswriter.com, when he first started, all he talked about was writing. Well, eventually he started taking his, as his voice began to evolve, he started taking his audience on a journey of personal growth. Right. And, he still writes about writing. Most of his stuff is still about writing. If you want to learn to be a better writer, I can't think of many places to learn from than Jeff.
Right.
But you're going to get some other stuff. But if he had started there, he probably wouldn't have 80, 90,000 people on, following him right now. He'd probably have like 2,000. And as he talks about, this was not goinswriter.com was not his first blog. I think it was like his third, fourth, or fifth.
Right.
He had plenty of others where he tried to go over there and, like you said, scream in the corner and nobody's listening. He's going, why is nobody listening? It's because nobody cares. So right. I love that. So in the book, you say that most of us become, and I'm quoting here, a reflection of everyone around us.
Right.
And I see this a lot, speaking of bloggers and podcasters, marketers, I see this, we see one new idea or trick, these hacks, as we like to say in the industry, and everyone immediately runs out to do that thing only to find that they don't have the same results. They don't get I do the same thing as Michael Hyatt and I don't get the same results. Shocker. Do you think this is because maybe we're abandoning our authentic voice for just tactics? Is that possibly what's happening these days?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, listen, we live in an age where peripheral vision can be a blessing and a curse, right? We are very aware of what's happening around us. We can look to the left and the right. We can see a million other people doing exactly what we're trying to do. And, I like to compare it to running a race. So think about when you're running a race, you look to the left, you look to the right. It's okay if you want to benchmark, if you want to look and see what's going on around you. But if you're running a race and you're looking over your shoulder at your competition, your body's going to want to follow where your eyes go. So eventually you're going to drift into their lane and you're not going to be moving toward the finish line anymore. And I think the same thing happens to us online. We get so concerned about short-term tactics, short-term attention. Hey, look at my thing. Look how popular my thing is. Look at how much attention I'm getting. Oh, how many retweets can I get on this blog post? Nobody cares. You can get 500,000 retweets on the blog post. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you right now, all of that is short-term attention and it doesn't matter in the long run. It really doesn't matter. Okay.
Yeah.
I have had people with millions of Twitter followers link directly to my content, right? On a consistent basis. And I'm telling you right now, those kinds of short-term things, it's really cool when that happens.
It is,
but these are not, life-changing types of things. You know what is life-changing? When you actually change somebody's life, when you actually impact somebody for the better, right? When you're doing work that matters, work that's substantive, work that actually is built on a foundation of something you're willing to go to the mat for, you're willing to suffer for if necessary. That's the word passion. What it means, it comes from the root word pati, which means to suffer, right? When you're willing to suffer on behalf of your work because you care so deeply about it, that's when the needle is moved. That's when lives change. And so we look at these people like Mike Hyatt or Jeff Goins and some of these people who are doing really cool stuff, right? People who have really suffered for their work. I mean, they've really put themselves into it. And then what do? We come in and we try to copy their tactics, right? We come in and we try to copy what they're doing from the outside and it falls flat. It doesn't work for us. Why? Because it's not authentic to us. We're copying tactics. When we should be thinking about how can I build my body of work? Maybe my tactics aren't going to be the same as that person's. Maybe they are, maybe, but we're not starting with what do I want to do? We're starting with how can I copy what somebody else is doing and replicate that and try to achieve a little bit of short-term success. Yeah. And in my mind, that's profoundly sad. It's really easy to do. That is the quick path. And I think also that, in many ways, it's kind of the cowardly path. Because you're not having to put yourself out there, create something unique, something valuable. Instead, you're just saying, I'm just going to copy what somebody else is already doing. And so I believe a far more substantive path is to say, I'm going to learn from the best. I'm going to see what's working for them. I'm going to emulate their tactics when it's valuable to me, but I'm not going to compromise what I care about, the work that I am doing. I'm willing to, in the short run, have fewer eyeballs in order to, in the long run, have more impact. I think that's the path of bravery, quite frankly.
Yeah. I think that trying to copy somebody's tactics is like, it's like suggesting that if I put on a black mock turtleneck and jeans and deliver a presentation that I'm going to be as good as Steve Jobs.
That's exactly right.
It's not the case. Like, that's not my style. If I put on a black mock turtleneck, I'm going to be doing this the whole time. And for those who can't see, I'm going to be scratching my neck the entire time because I can't stand.
Right.
It's like Mitch Hedberg said, it's like being dragged down by a weak midget. But anyway, I got my Mitch Hedberg reference in for this interview. I got to check that one off the box there. So, so I have three questions to wrap up here. Todd, I'm kind of curious, like, how would you describe your process? Take us through your process of finding your authentic voice. That you're putting your authentic voice out there in the world with your blog, with your podcast, with your books. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, so I've been developing this for a long, long time, right? I would say that it all began with me in a place of really deeply noticing a place where I was experiencing a lot of compassionate anger, frustration with what I saw going on in the marketplace with creative professionals, that creative pros were used and abused and thrown away. And that really bothered me. And also somebody who was in the middle of trying to lead a team of people and trying to not let that happen with my team and trying to lead them to a better place. And so that was really kind of the genesis for me. And this was, over a decade ago, that all of this was stirring in me. And that's what eventually led to my work. And so it's all founded still to this day, fueled very much by that sense of justice, of compassionate anger. But it wasn't enough just to feel like, oh, this is terrible. This is not right. I had to have a vision for that, which meant that I had to figure out, okay, where do I want to lead people? Which meant I had to go to school and discover what are the best practices, what's happening, how are people doing this really well, leaders and creative teams, how are they doing this really well so that they can be prolific, brilliant, and healthy. And that was part of me developing a vision for my audience and my intended audience and being very precise and specific about that vision. And then I had to master a set of skills to be able to put that into the world. And if you listen to the early days of the Accidental Creative Podcast, which launched in like 2005.
Did it really?
I mean, it was awful. It was really, really bad.
That's a decade ago.
A decade
I did not know you've been doing this for a decade, Todd. Wow.
Yeah. But if you listen to the early days of the podcast, bad. I mean, it was just bad. I had to develop, the skills to be able to build that platform to bring it into the world. And quite frankly, I was not a good writer either. Now I've written 3 books, published 3 books in 5 years with Penguin, but I was not a good writer. Had to develop my chops there as well. So I would say all 3 of those have played out in my life. The question that you need to ask yourself if you want to go through that process is, what am I noticing right now that irks me? What is the change that I want to see in the world? What is the thing? How can I infuse that? Not go out and find a job that will fit that. How can I infuse more of that into what's in front of me right now? And then who is my audience for that? It could be an external audience. It could be my manager's manager. I don't know who that is, right? But who is the audience for that? And then what skills do I need to be working on right now so that I can bring that into my work on a daily basis? And as you develop those 3 areas over the course of time, you find that your voice becomes more resonant and more consistent.
So for those listening, Todd started a decade ago, and of course he started making money with the podcast right away. That's how it always works. Pause for the sarcasm there to kick in. No, he did this. He's done this for a decade. That's why he's got such an awesome podcast, because he's been doing it for a decade. So just wanted to make sure that wasn't missed. Todd, as you researched, as you wrote this book, I mean, I think you conducted 100+ interviews, was it?
Yeah. And over the course of many, many years, there were a lot of interviews that went back. I mean, pretty far back actually, for this, which is one of the benefits of having done this for a decade now, is I have a pretty deep database.
Oh, yeah. What, it's probably a tough question, but what was maybe not your favorite, but what was the most memorable or unique interview that you've done for this?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. And you're talking specifically about the podcast? No,
in general, like anything that you would have applied to this book. What was like the most memorable or unique interview that you've done? And it could be a podcast.
Yeah. Let's see. I would say One of my favorite interviews was with Seth Goldman, who is a co-founder of Honest Tea, because I loved his story. I loved
I
kind
love
of
his tea.
what's that?
I love his tea.
Oh yeah, I love his tea. I love his story. I really felt like he was a person who had a vision, had an idea. The timing for the idea wasn't right when he first went to launch it with his partner, but I loved to hear his story of tenacity and how they shaped the brand, how they stayed true to their vision. It just really resonated deeply with me. So that was a really fun interview, I would say, and that interview actually ended up making it into this book.
Nice.
But back in 2006, I had the chance to interview. Some of my first interviews for the Accidental Creative were Stephen Pressfield, Seth Godin, David Allen. Some of these people. And one of the things I've loved about doing podcasts specifically is it's given me the opportunity to reach out to some of my personal heroes, people that I've really respected for a long time, and interview them. I think in fact that I probably was the first podcast interview for Stephen Pressfield. I mean, the War of Art had already gained traction at that point in 2006 or whatever, but so that was kind of fun, just to get to speak to somebody in person, and it's just been really kind of fun to see this medium explode. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. He's one of my favorite authors.
Yeah,
as he is for many of us creatives. Oh, awesome stuff. So
Yeah.
last question, Todd. This is the only question I literally ask every single guest, and I'm going to ask it of you. And that is, what legacy do you want to leave, Todd?
So it's actually 6 words. I didn't know you were going to ask this, but I'm glad you did. My 6 words are create fiercely, love well, die empty. That's what I want.
That was your last book, right?
Only 6 words. I want people to know that every single day I went to work and I just created with every ounce of my might, and I tried to make work that would influence people around me. That I loved the people around me. I emptied myself every day in the service to other people. So I was a wonderful lover of other people. And then at the end, I died empty of regret because I didn't leave my best work inside of me. They didn't put me in the grave with my best work inside of me. Instead, I did everything I could every day to get my best work out of me in the service of the people around me.
I love that. Die empty of regrets. It's a great way to live.
Absolutely.
So I love that.
Well, if you live empty, then you will die empty, right?
There you go. So guys, he has found his authentic voice, and he is helping you and many others, those who check out this book, to harness the power of their authentic voices with this podcast, with this blog, with his books, with interviews like this. Todd, you've been gracious with your time, and Todd, you are a world changer. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Matt. And thanks for the work that you do.
Sorry, I got to fix my screen so I could see you. It's driving me crazy. Okay. All right. You ready?
Yeah, man.
I'm like, I can't even see him. Okay. Create fiercely, love well, die empty. Man, I love that. What a great interview, Matt. I really loved how passionate Todd was about the idea of developing your authentic voice. But what did you find interesting about it?
I just had something really good and forgot.
That'll be our first note. Where are we at?
I don't remember what I was going to say.
And we made it 3 minutes, folks. 3 minutes.
Well, technically, if they're watching the interview,
true.
It's been like 40 minutes, but 35 minutes. Oh my goodness, man. I totally forget.
Did you even watch the interview? Do you even know what happened?
Oh no, I remembered it. Like, that's just it. It was oh, poop. What was it? I literally don't remember what it was. I mean, like 30 seconds ago, I had it in my mind while you were talking, while you were reading his thing, and I was like, I knew, I could see this question coming, so I'm like, yeah, I gotta think of that, and I had it, I had it, and I'm like, yeah, I remember thinking that was really good. I remember writing that down.
That was really good.
I'm gonna grab my notebook actually.
Not gonna move a lot of downloads this way. So, anyways, while Matt's doing it, here's the book. If you haven't seen it yet, hey, Matt's back now. Todd Henry, Louder Than Words, Text Authentic.
This is how we stretch out the
444. in order
Process, yeah.
to see Matt's talking, but he doesn't have his headphones in, so he doesn't know that I'm talking and he's interrupting me. So authentic to 33444. Matt, quit interrupting me. Just because you don't have your headphones in doesn't mean nobody else is talking.
Yeah.
Is the
So
way
they're
it's-
actually, I've got my notes digitized now. I'm
Would you
really,
like to try again?
yeah, we're gonna get there in a minute. What did you find interesting? I don't know. So I'm trying to find these. Where are these show notes here?
You know what I said when you walked away? I said not going to move a lot of books this way. What did you find interesting about the interview? It was so interesting. I don't even remember.
Well, the thing is, there's multiple things that I found interesting. It's a matter of the best one that I wanted to share, and I'm finding that now. So, all right.
Oh, man.
Boy.
See, now I can do a 3 to 5 minutes is what I have to edit. 3 to 6 minutes.
Okay. Oh man. Okay. Let's rock this. You can ask that question
ready?
again. Yeah, start that process over.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm ready. I promise.
Good thing we're not on a time crunch. Create fiercely, love well, die empty. I love that. What a great interview. And I really loved, Matt, how passionate Todd was about this idea of developing your authentic voice. But what did you find interesting about the interview?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about the interview in the book is, and when I asked him about this, is like, this authentic voice concept. We hear this, like, you got to find your authentic voice. And, Todd really debunks that. It's not something that you go out, it's like you dig it up in the backyard like a dog digs up a bone. That's not how this works. I think we instinctively know our authentic voice. I think the biggest thing that keeps us from sharing that authentic voice is not finding the authentic voice, it's sharing the authentic voice. Is just that fear of, maybe it's fear of being found out, fear of, being authentic, because it can be scary. And I know I've found that true in my life, and with my experience, building an online platform where, I kind of like, and I wrote about this with Jeff Goins, and I mentioned this in my interview with Todd, that, when I first spoke with Jeff Goins about 1.5 years, almost 2 years ago, for his book, The Art of Work, basically the short version of my story was, hey, Jeff, here's how awesome I am. And here's how amazing my life is, because like, here's what I'm doing. And my work is amazing. And I make a lot of money and, blah, 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 blah. Right. Mm-hmm. And then he emails me later and he says, here's the thing, Matt, like, I talked to you and you tried to tell this one story, but I pulled this different story out of you. And, it's a story of failure. It's a story of being fired 4 times, twice by the same company, once by your own dad. It's a story of facing 42 years in prison. It's it's a story of making all these mistakes and still ending up, where you are. That's a story I would like to read. That's a story I'm going to include in my new book. That's a story that I think people will appreciate hearing, and I hope you'll tell it. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the things I learned from that is basically my much of the format of the podcast, much of the format of my blog has become, here's how I messed up. Here's the process I went through to come out of that. Here's what I learned from it. And here's how you can use that. Mm-hmm. But it starts with that. Here's how I messed up. And that's a transparent place. That's an authentic place. And that's a scary place to be, because I'm like a lot of people. I don't really like to admit that I'm not perfect, even though I think we all instinctively know, hey, newsflash, everyone, Matt's not perfect, but
wait, what?
Yeah. You'll have to make sure that when you edit the podcast, that doesn't get edited out, because I get quiet there. I'm going to make a note to edit that part out though. Audio, but yeah, anyway, newsflash, Matt's not perfect. And, but my authentic voice is one where I am vulnerable, and I'm not afraid to share what I'm afraid of. I'm not afraid to get past that fear of admitting that I'm not perfect, that I messed up, and here's what I've learned from it, and here's what you can learn from it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, as you were talking about that, it struck me that, Jeff pointed out that this is your story, but I think when we realize that what our story is, it's so it resonates, because I mean, you talk about that now and it's like you came up with it. And I think that's what's really neat about, developing your voice. But, one of the things that I thought was neat was there's so much language, and you guys talk about this a little bit, how there's so much language in, the conversation is today about platform and voice, and it's always finding your voice. And I thought it was interesting that Todd said that he did everything he could to get rid of all of that language. So as you were listening to him talk about that and what you've read of the book, what did you learn about that subtle difference? I mean, we hear a lot of people that we respect talk about finding your voice. So what's that subtle difference that Todd's talking about?
Well, I actually just looked down at the book, and I mean, the subtitle of the book is Harness the Power of Your Authentic Voice. Harness the power. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, like, when you harness something, it clearly suggests that it's already there. Mm-hmm. It already exists. And that's really a lot of what I just talked about. Like the voice is already there. Yeah. So the difference between finding your voice and discovering or developing is the same as, I can go outside right now and I can search through our yard and try to find, let's just say a specific flower. I can try to find that flower, mm-hmm. or I already have a flower and now I'm going to develop it. And so what am I going to do to develop a flower? I'm going to water it. I'm going to give it the nutrients it needs. So that might mean that I give it, a certain type of fertilizer. You could tell I'm not a flower expert, but it might, I know it needs like nitrogen and, things like that. We're going to make sure that it's positioned for the right amount of sunlight, not too much, not too little. And we're going to develop it. We're going to cultivate it. We're going to invest the time. We're going to practice. Mm-hmm. We're going to pour our blood, our sweat, and our tears into that flower. And so the same thing is true with your authentic voice. You're gonna practice it. You're gonna craft it. That model that I shared. This is how I messed up. This is how I came out of it. This is what I learned from it, and here's how you can use this information. Mm-hmm. That model didn't just that wasn't the next day. Jeff didn't tell me this, and I went bang. That's it. It evolved. It was an evolution, right? And it came from practicing, and it came from I always like to say I throw stuff up against the wall and see what sticks, and it came from that. And again, even throwing stuff up against the wall and seeing what sticks, in order to do that, if you're a writer, if you're a blogger, if you're a podcaster, you know what that means? You got to be willing to do. You got to be willing to write some crap. You got to be willing to write a post that no one reads. Mm-hmm. You got to be willing to write a post that no one shares. And you got to be willing to do that, because in doing that, you are developing your voice.
I think that's, so important, because and that leads to another thing that I was just thinking of, and the idea of not just looking for validation from everyone. I loved how Todd talked about that, how, hey, yeah, I've got tons of retweets. I've got, I've had viral posts, but that's not what it's about. And I wish I would have written it down, but there's the one line in there where he says, what's world changing? When you change somebody's world. Mm-hmm. And that was just, to me, is that's so awesome, because I think we all get caught up in this idea of we have to have so many Twitter followers, and we have to have such a list size or whatever. But I mean, in my experience, the things that really matter aren't those numbers. It's when you get that email from somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
And that email says, man, that totally changed the way I look at this. Or, man, I've really, really focused in on this because of what you said. And I just love that idea that's what's important, because it's so easy to worry about the other stuff. It's so easy to get caught up in tracking the analytics and finding how many people retweeted, or looking at how many page views you had that day. But mm-hmm. that's not the stuff that's really important. So when you hear Todd talking about that, and you take your experience as a content creator, as a blogger, as a podcaster, how does that affect the way you approach creating content and using your voice?
Well, I think, when I first started, I spoke and my mindset was, it's all about mindset. My mindset was one to many. I am one and I'm speaking to many. And mm-hmm. now it's a mental shift. I'm speaking to an individual. I learned a really cool trick from a guy, a client of ours, Mark, Chandler Bolt. Mm-hmm. And he said that one of the things that he does, he actually starts off the chapters of his books. He starts it off with Dear blank. And that blank is his avatar, whoever the avatar is for that book. So, for those who don't know the process, to create an avatar, you literally think, okay, who is the ideal person who's reading this? Who am I writing this for? Who am I doing my business for? And so we'll say it's Jimmy. Well, how old is Jimmy? Is Jimmy married? Is he single? Is Jimmy, how many kids does Jimmy have? What hobbies does Jimmy have? What are Jimmy's struggles? So you got Jimmy, and Jimmy's 33 years old. He's a sidepreneur, meaning, he's working in a cube 40 hours a week, but he's got this side hustle business on the side, and he's stuck in a cube, but he knows there's more to life. I'm describing our avatar here. He knows there's more to life, but he doesn't know how to get there. Okay. So I start the writing off. Dear Jimmy, and I tell Jimmy what I would tell Jimmy if I were sitting, if I were spending 10 minutes on a coaching call with him. I tell him what I would tell him, and then I'm done. And I've written it. And so having that mindset of I'm writing this to an individual, maybe, just maybe, I don't know if that limits the reach that I could have, because some of the stuff that I write and talk about is not universally appealable. But I do know that when I do that, that's when I get the most emails back saying, wow, Matt, that spoke to me today. I love the emails that I get. And it's not like I get thousands of these a day, but I do get these from time to time where it's like, you have no idea how much that spoke to me in this exact season of my life. It's like you've been reading, or it's Matt, it's like you've been reading my journal. Right. Matt, it's like, are you a fly on the wall in my house? Like, how could you possibly know that I'm going through what I'm going through? Because that helped me. And the reality is I don't. And a lot of it is math, simple math, like, thousands of people, like one of them is probably going to be going through that, but it's, when you have that mindset of you're speaking to one person as opposed to one to many, then I think that's when you're going to have the most impact on individuals.
Well, I think you're right. It is so much of the mindset. I mean, I think of the quotes that you mentioned in the podcast and that Todd mentioned, and they all seem to kind of tie back to that. You mentioned Ray Edwards talking about how the hero is the listener, and you mentioned, was it you or Todd that mentioned, I can't remember, but quoted the quote where it's like, join the conversation that's already going on inside people's heads.
Yeah, that's me quoting. Oh man, I think it's who's the
Kennedy?
great copywriter?
Is it Dan Kennedy?
No, I'm not sure if it's Dan Kennedy or the other guy whose name I cannot think of to save my life. But I mean, like one of the original guys in copywriting, and gotcha, it's why you it's a little marketing tip for you. It's like if you go to my to mattmcwilliams.com and you look at the buttons where you would click to do something, it says get my for ebook, and that's not it's not actually my way of saying get my ebook as in Matt McWilliams's ebook. It's actually when you click, you don't say yes I want your ebook, you say I want my ebook, because it now belongs to you, the listener, to the reader, and so you're joining the conversation that's already happening in someone's head. And yeah, it could have been Dan Kennedy, but I want to say it was that other guy whose name just escapes me. It'll come to me as soon as we're done recording, of course.
Oh, that's funny. But, and then the final quote that I thought of as you were saying that was, you said that there's no way that you can speak to everyone. But I remember hearing Andy Stanley say one time that you do for one what you wish you could do for many. And I think that's the same thing. You can't talk to everybody. There's no way. And so as you're developing your voice, you have to think of that individual person, and you have to think of what they're going through. And if you'll do that, I think you and Todd were spot on that's when you've developed that voice, and that's when people start following you. It's not when you're looking for people to start following you. It's when you start worrying about them that they're going to, immediately start following you. Not immediately, but that's when it's going to start turning around.
David Ogilvy, by the way.
There it was.
David Ogilvy. Ogilvy on advertising. That book's from like the 50s, I think. Yeah. Long before social media and all that. But yeah, Ogilvy. David Ogilvy.
So Matt, the quote for this week is actually one that as I was flipping through Todd's book, I found it and I loved it. It's a Stephen R. Covey quote. And Dr. Covey said, "One word expresses the pathway to greatness: voice. Those on this path find their voice and inspire others to find theirs. The rest never do." And Todd would probably want us to change that to those on this path develop their voice and inspire others to develop theirs. and the rest never do. But I think that's so true. You know, is there anything else that really stuck out to you in this interview, or anything with that quote that you'd like to talk about?
You know, I mean, Mark, I think that quote really does sum up a lot, because it, when we discover our authentic voice, whether this is you as an individual or a company, a nonprofit, when you not really discover your authentic voice, but when you practice it, when you develop it, when you hone it, and you have that story, that's when you're going to get to the next level in your business, in your personal life. You know, I think about like when I do podcast interviews now, the evolution of my story in 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is my story hasn't changed that much. You know, we have a 4.5-year-old instead of a 1-year-old. We have a newborn son instead of not a newborn son, but I'm still married. I still live in the same place. I'm still doing pretty much the same thing. My story has not evolved like by leaps and bounds, but the story that I tell has, because I've discovered and I've pieced together the things myself, and I've discovered, like, you know, what's not attractive necessarily, but what resounds with people, what speaks to people, and what doesn't speak to people. And when you hone that over time, then I think that's when you're going to get to the next level. In fact, I know that's when you're going to get to the next level, because story speaks to people. There's a reason why, notwithstanding the recent disgusting stuff that happened in his life, but there's a reason why Subway used Jared's story for almost 2 decades.
Yeah,
because it was easy to see that it was a transformation story. You know, the story of just do it. You know, those 3 words are story.
Mm-hmm.
For 2 decades, Nike's advertising was story based. It was all about, you know, overcoming obstacles and going for that run and things like that, finding the inner athlete in you. It was story based. So story is a very effective form of advertising, of communicating. And, you know, when you have a powerful story, when somebody, you know, asks you about yourself, and you kind of have that story to tell, the 1 or 2 minute story, you know, and you've got, and it feels like a story, and people go, man, I want to know more. Like, let me dig into your story, as opposed to, yeah, I mean, I could state the facts. I'm 36. I have 2 kids. I'm married, and I have my own business. Wow, that's really engaging. Or I could talk to people and actually tell them, you know, the short version of my story that draws them in. They feel like they know me better. Like, if I told you those facts, you don't really know anything about me.
Right.
But if I tell you my story, it's like we're best friends.
Mm-hmm.
Big difference.
That's so true. And I think that's, you know, really what it does come down to. And that's one of the things I love about that book, is there's so many stories in it and so many examples of why this works. So as we wrap up, like we said in the beginning, we would love to give away a copy of this book, Todd's book, Louder Than Words. And not only would we love to, we are going to. And if you would like to be one of those that has the opportunity to win the free copy, text authentic to 33444. Again, that's authentic to 33444 for your chance to win a free copy of Todd Henry's book, Louder Than Words. So before we get to this week's question, Matt, let's thank a few more folks who have given us ratings and reviews on iTunes.
Well, thank you to everyone. 6 people this past week who left a rating and review. Derek Loudermilk, Rock Capuano, probably butchered your name. Sorry about that. Kirk Barbera, Taking 10, Lori Lynn Smith, and Triple C Wong. CCC Wong, and I actually want to highlight it. Just ironic, you know, on this topic, you know, Mr. Wong or Mrs. Wong there said, love how honest Matt is with his story. It's one thing to listen to a podcast about being a success from someone who has rarely known failure. It's quite another thing, and so much more impressive and impactful to hear from a guy like Matt who has failed over and over and still manages to rise up each time as a wiser and humbler person. I'm hooked. And that was, I just happened to catch that
That's
right
awesome.
now as we were, as I was looking through those. I was like, wow, that's really cool. You know, like, talk about, that's exactly what the theme of this
Right.
podcast has been. So thank you to all of you. And, you know, if you haven't left a rating and review yet, you can do so. Mark will tell you how.
You can do so by going to the show notes page, mattmcwilliams.com/091, and there'll be a link there to leave a rating and review. And once again, if you want to be entered to win the free copy of Todd's book, Louder Than Words, text authentic to 444. So now for today's question. The question is, why do you think it's important to develop your authentic voice? What are you smiling about over there?
Because you messed up this time.
I was hoping you would notice. Okay, back to this question. What's our time at? I'm not going to look at mine right away. Do you have your Audacity open?
Oh, yeah, hang on. Approximately at 24:45. Okay. 24:30. Maybe just start listening at 24:30.
Okay. All right. And now for this week's question, why do you think it's important to develop your authentic voice? Head over to mattmcwilliams.com/091 to answer that question as well as jeez. Oh man, I like all of a sudden forgot how to talk.
So if you need a timestamp, it's about 25:30. 1 minute after the last one.
Says the guy who used 3 minutes at the beginning. Okay, here we go. All right. And now for this week's question. Why do you think it's important to develop your authentic voice? Head over to mattmcwilliams.com/091 to answer that question, as well as get the links to everything we talked about today and the unedited video cast. On next week's episode, we have an interview with Shannon Kaiser. Matt and Shannon talk about her new book, Adventures for Your Soul. For those of you watching on video, I'm going to lock access to changing the show notes when we're editing or recording because Matt just added words in as I'm trying to read. And I almost kept going. I almost fought through it. Whew. Your face is all red. You laughing over there? I think you have your mic turned off.
Yes, I do. Okay.
Good thing we caught that. Jeez. I'm going to turn it off again. All right. On next week's episode, we have an interview with Shannon Kaiser. Can you delete that out of there? Jeez. Oh, man. That was funny. Okay. Let's try this again. Oh, man. All right. Hack job of an interview episode. It'd take me 3 times as long to edit this one. On next week's episode, we have an interview with Shannon Kaiser. Matt and Shannon talk about her new book, Adventures for Your Soul, and the importance of being who you are meant to be, which ties in pretty well with what we talked about today. Take a listen to this clip. Until next week, remember, you were born to change the world. Oh, man. I can't hear you. Turn on your microphone.
Okay, so 28 minutes. Yeah, okay.
Oh, geez. No, it's just from 24 on, basically.
There's a
24 to the end.
Trust me, out of the past 5 minutes, at least 90 seconds are usable. Okay.
Yeah, I'm locking access. You're not going to be able to edit after this. Until next week, remember, you were born to change the world. You were born to make history, and you need your authentic voice to do it. So believe it, become it, and pass it on.
Good job, man. All right. So for those watching, I did insert a couple of silly comments into Mark's script there, and that's what
you were born. What, you were born the rumble in the jungle?
The jungle. That's all I could think of. So
I should have just done it with a straight face and just been like, "Oh, we're done."
I'm Ron Burgundy. Anyway, that's okay. All right, guys. We'll see you next time.
See ya.